Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. I hope my voice is clear. Let me just share my screen. And Manish, I hope this looks okay. Sorry. Yeah. I'm Anand Krishnamurthy, and on behalf of Envint, I welcome you all to our inaugural webinar on ESG integration. Today is the first day of Navratri, and wishing you a very happy festive season ahead. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we begin. Please ensure that your mics are on mute, and we will have time for questions. Please do feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, and we will visit those questions later. At any time during the presentation, you can enter. This is our first webinar in our three-part series on ESG integration. And during the next 1 hour or so, we will delve into some details on what it really means for to lay a strong foundation for ESG integration within a company. And we have two ESG experts with us today. Very warm welcome to Guy Alexander, ESG Director of CDC, and Dr. Sunita Purushottam, Head of Sustainability at Mahindra Life Spaces. Few lines of introduction for them both. The Guy joined the CDC group in 2009, the UK government's premier development finance institution. He is currently a director responsible for delivery of CDC's ESG commitments and providing practical guidance to portfolio companies on various aspects of ESG. Guy has considerable experience working with PE funds and for creating resources, imparting training to improve portfolio ESG performance. Even in this time frame of more than a decade, Guy has had considerable experience in India. He claims to have visited more than 30 airports in India. And he's, for the record, also Mumbai happens to be his favorite city. Thank you, Guy, for joining us today. Dr. Sunita, many of you would know, she's the head of sustainability for Mahindra Life Spaces, a member of the Mahindra and Mahindra Sustainability Council. She has over 20 years experience in environment, in sustainability strategy and various areas of environmental consulting, and in diverse areas ranging from air pollution control to waste management to ESG risk assessments. A nature lover, she is a PhD in environmental engineering. She, over the last many years, she's worked in various consulting organizations, in sustainability teams of large corporates like Infosys, and has also been a founding member in a startup in the sustainability technology domain. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. Sunita. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, from world leaders to business leaders, ESG has been on everyone's lips and minds in the last recent years, and it could very well be the most talked about acronym in the financial circles today. And what we've seen we've seen major announcements, proclamations, and pledges regarding ESG. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of them, from the world's largest asset manager making an announcement on ESG to the Business Roundtable changing their purpose of a corporation to serve not just stakeholders, not just shareholders, but also wider set of stakeholders. Closer home in India, where the PM himself made an announcement on ESG, and very recently, Mr. Anand Mahindra stating that he will be supporting the WEF's effort to standardize reporting around ESG. So a lot of action around the world and in India on ESG. And what this has really led to is that companies are having to struggle with the balancing act between planet and profits. And these struggles are not going away anywhere, and it's only increasing. And at our conversations with Envint and a lot of companies, we do have leaders talking to us on how do they get started on the ESG journey, what should they be doing. So there's a lot of confusion. And that's the starting point of this webinar. And in this context, we'll now come down from 30,000 feet to the ground and see what my colleague Manish Jain has to say on this. Over to you, Manish.
Thanks, Anand. Hello, everyone. Happy festive wishes, and once again, a warm welcome to you all. So as Anand mentioned, the planet and country level plans are great as a trigger, and they obviously have set a strong base for the whole world to adopt sustainability and go down this path. But how can organizations, and to be specific, corporates, approach this subject of ESG integration? So as a starting point, we scanned scores of job descriptions for positions seeking out ESG and sustainability professionals. Enter Winnie. Winnie here, who represents all such ESG professionals having multiple responsibilities, some of which are on the screen as a common thread from the above JDs being scanned. As you can see, it's a multidisciplinary role with elements of strategy, goal setting, targets, data collection and monitoring, communication approach, and all this entailing project management and coordination across functions. Well, it seems, or almost seems, that Winnie is an iron woman and now would need Jarvis to help her. But while Winnie is smart and experienced, her organization has just started the ESG journey, and her biggest decision today is to lay its foundation for ESG. And to make this decision, the most critical input to roll that out is in understanding the ESG expectations of the organization stakeholders, in this case, the investors. And who better than the ESG head of one of the world's largest investors to guide Winnie on this aspect. So Guy, I request you to throw light on the investor perspective for ESG integration and mentor Winnie over here. Over to you, Guy.
Thank you, Manish, and it's nice to speak to everybody today. It's a pleasure to be here, and happy festive season. I mean, I think one of the first things I'd say to Vinny is that she's embarked on a journey at probably one of the best points when you could be entering the ESG profession. I don't think I've ever seen a time when ESG professionals are so much in demand, although I do see from her job description she's been given a particularly ambitious mandate, and so has a lot to take on day one with engaging with shareholders, sort of engaging across operational functional teams, and sort of having a real focus on reporting as well. And if her company's aim is really to be best in class, she's got a lot to take on. I mean, the way I tend to start talking to someone who's taken on this mandate is to sort of think a little bit about the ESG journey that's happened over the past decade, and I've tried to capture that on this slide here. That when I started at CDC 10 years ago, I kind of felt many corporates were more toward the left-hand side of that slide, that ESG and corporate social responsibility were very much conflated, and that there wasn't really the link between shareholder value and perhaps ESG risk management that perhaps there is today. And in a sense, where I would characterize many Indian companies right now is that risk management is core, and the concepts of avoid ESG risks where you can, reduce or mitigate where that you cannot avoid completely, if not choose to manage or tolerate, and then build systems, audit, compliance and corporate governance is becoming increasingly mainstream. And I'm sure everyone is aware that if you look at the Securities Exchange Board of India, for instance, in terms of listing requirements, ESG is becoming one of the parameters there, and so that's on the risk management side. But then I think you've got to think, as you enter the profession, what more can I do? And that's where this concept of value creation in ESG really does come front and center. And that could mean different things to different companies. It could be looking at energy or water efficiencies where there's an immediate tangible cost saving. But it could actually be thinking about the sort of the standards you would like your business to work towards in order to sort of realize competitive advantage, enter new markets, sort of engage with stakeholders better than you have done previously. And so as Vinny starts out her role, one of the things she really does need to be thinking about is where does management sit on this spectrum, and how does she want to start her engagement? If we jump to the next slide, if that's possible. This is a very simplistic reduction of what CDC, amongst other international development finance investors, looks for in terms of its ESG requirements. I mean, most investors, when they start out, will start with something called a negative screen, a series of sectors or activities they don't wish to be exposed to, and that's exclusion, and that's been in place for a very large number of years. There's then an expectation about basic the basic risk management that should be very front and centre for Vinnie when she starts out. This is compliance, local law, ILO core labour standards, and essentially access to remedy are things that stakeholders increasingly expect, and as an investor, we would see as mandatory. And that's not always simple. And if Vinnie really is in a startup, that is also a source of competitive advantage, I would suggest, compared to the market. The benchmark, though, for development finance is something called the IFC performance standards. And those are laid out very simplistically on the screen for you here. This is an emerging sort of harmonized good practice on good international industry practice on best-in-class sustainability outcomes. This has been a result of a multi-stakeholder initiative that's gone on for a number of years, and these were last finalized in 2012. They cover most aspects of ESG that Vinnie would encounter on day one. This concept of risk management or environmental social management system, I'll come to in a second, but that cross-cuts a management system approach to managing risk. You then have sort of three areas: labour, resource efficiency, and community security, community health and safety, that I would say would be relevant to most companies, including the one that Vinnie would be in. And those standards are complex, but perhaps can be explore risks that can be mitigated in a relatively straightforward or common way. You then have the more advanced IFC performance standards down the bottom on land resettlement, biodiversity, indigenous people and cultural heritage, which there's a fair chance Vinnie won't be exposed to at all in terms of her corporate social management system. But equally, if they are encountered, those are the kind of things where Vinnie is unlikely to have much experience herself, and she's going to have to go out and seek third-party advisory. She's going to have to really think through what it is I need to know, because these risks are long-term, have potentially very big cost implications, and as a corporate, you're going to need to think very carefully about how you handle. If we jump to the next slide, I think this is where as an investor, Vinnie really does need to start thinking on day one, and this is a management systems approach to how to think about ESG and impact. And essentially, the point I want to make from this slide is that whatever Vinnie does to meet her job mandate is multidimensional. It is not just developing a policy and expecting that an E&S policy that captures key risks that Vinnie is facing is going to happen overnight. What actually happens in a management system is you need to be thinking about what are your key risks and impacts, what management programs you need to mitigate those risks, who and where do responsibilities sit within an organization. And for the most part, that won't be with Vinnie. There will be other corporate departments that will need to communicate with Vinnie in order to sort of identify where those risks lie, to set risk tolerances, to train and to educate the workforce. There needs to be an emergency brake, emergency preparedness and response, something that is often forgotten. And then this concept that you rightly brought up, Manish, the need to engage stakeholders and sort of to implement a grievance mechanism, which is so that it is not just the effective parties of the management system that Vinnie is seeking to be part of can respond to when things go wrong. And that's not something to be defensive about. Actually, that's a sign that really good companies take very seriously. And then there's the bit that tells you whether your management system is working, the need to monitor performance and review and make changes. Now that's an exercise in itself, and that you need good data is the crux of being able to know if your risk screen and your management programs are working effectively. And so any risk-based approach really does need to start with sort of the KPIs on whether the risks are managed effectively. And that's something actually that I don't see that often in many companies. There's a whole layer of complexity beneath this, and you could then start playing around with concepts of what does this really look like in different sectors and in different types of investment. I mean, for a small SME, it might be that based in a single factory, actually your risk and impact might be pretty much within the control of those within the factory floor. If though you are a corporate asset with multiple different business lines, you may need to be thinking about how to integrate environmental social impact assessments into your environmental social management systems, how to take various management plans and take those up to corporate head office, who takes responsibility for different projects, and the whole mechanism becomes much more complex. And the key thing for me is that management commitment, the sort of the cog 4 here is the bit where it really comes home to roost. If you get that bit right, then your risk and impact stream will be adaptable and it can evolve for the whatever challenge you face. If we jump now to sort of a slightly different concept, this is the role of board, senior management, and the C-suite, so the chief executive's office, CFO, that kind of thing. And I put this here just to sort of help Vinny problematize where she needs to go in order to get a management system that's world class. It comes as perhaps no surprise to anyone on this call, I suspect, that management commitment to ESG is the surest way that investor standards can be realized. If management has a different alignment to their investors, it's going to be hard to achieve sort of good risk management. But what sometimes lacks, and it's something that as CDC we're increasingly beginning to think through, is how to get the committees of a board involved in the implementation of environmental social management system and sort of being aware and understand what investor requirements look like. I mean, this is super simplistic. I'm just setting out some of the key things that a board does, how a board is sort of steers and sets strategic direction. It approves policy and planning. I mean, policy includes anything that's developed as part of the environmental social management system, which is going to be a key investor requirement for Vinny. Board is going to need to set risk tolerance and materiality thresholds so that when you think of a corporate risk register, what you really want to know from an ENS perspective, alongside other things, is what a risk tolerance actually is. So if it's about effluent production or OHS incidents, so lost time injury frequency rate, what is it that indicates that there's a real problem where board is going to want senior management to intervene? And that's an important control mechanism. And that leads to sort of this concept of accountability and oversight that is something that boards increasingly have to do, but is an independent control on the function of environmental social management system. And that's something that as investors we can obviously seek to influence, but it's something that I think that Vinny, perhaps on day one, might not realise the role that senior management is going to need to play to sort of to cascade down investor requirements in environmental social planning. Let's jump to my final slide, which is something that I wanted to put up more to problematize Vinny's life more than anything else. I mean, we've just been through the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that's come out most strongly after it in the UK, and I understand in India as well, is that the world of ESG is more front and center of investors, regulators, and companies' horizons. But there are more issues now, perhaps, that are front of mind than perhaps there has ever been before. Climate change is clearly one. Investors are speaking the language of Paris alignment and looking to reach net zero in their portfolio by 2030, 2040, 2050, depending on who they are. And that's something that, in terms of physical risk or transition risk, many corporates are already facing. But I put on this list here, I put on this slide here, the sheer number of different issues that could be front and center of a company's environmental social management system or risk landscape. This could be biodiversity, it could be the context of which a company is operating in, and that relates to human rights as well. Does the state have the ability to, if the state is not protecting human rights in quite the same way that a company would want to see in terms of its stakeholder landscape, what more can a company do to mitigate risks there? Cybersecurity, data privacy, animal welfare, all of these things are risks that Vinny may encounter in the course of her career. But I just wanted to finish by challenging people to go, these are risks very really, but are they actually bad news for Vinny, or are they actually a business opportunity as well? That if you can demonstrate that you are front foot on any of these issues here, because they are a risk to business continuity, that is actually likely a source of competitive advantage as well. And that ultimately is the point of what investors push for in ESG. It's a way of differentiating a company, giving them access to new markets, giving them more confidence before their shareholders, and also being better corporates. And so these are risks, these are opportunities, and that I think could probably be the final point I'd want to leave Vinny with. Thanks, Manish.
Thank you, Guy, and thanks for also ending with on a very optimistic note as to not to be fearful of these emerging issues, but see them as opportunities. I'd just like to remind all participants that they could use the chat box for posting their questions, and we'll revert to them after Dr. Sunita's presentation. To summarize what Guy has been saying in the last few minutes, try to put together a few critical points. It is important that Vinny understands what the international ESG benchmarks are and how the investors are measuring ESG. It is very important to understand the stakeholders and the people relationships and people roles within a system, and that will help in developing a pragmatic approach to ESG. Identification of material issues and risks is also important, and Dr. Sunita is going to touch upon this in more detail in the next few slides. And finally, probably the most critical point made by Guy was that it's important to have leadership support throughout the process, and the role of management is very, very important in all of this. Now, having understood the investor perspective, let us move over to a seasoned sustainability professional from a group that has set very, very high standards on sustainability and ESG. And let's see what Vinny can learn from Dr. Sunita. Over to you, Dr. Sunita.
Thank you. So I'll just take it from where Guy has left. But before we get to the materiality piece and understand that a little bit more in depth, Vinny perhaps needs to understand where Vinny is or where the organization is. And in context of these areas, primarily first a starting point would be compliance, and is the organization externalizing its impacts or not, and what is it doing about it? What sort of business actions it is taking? How is it exploring opportunities? And I put opportunities ahead of risks, and in between lies the goals, and then finally the disclosures. So of course, this is not in any order as such, but I would put compliance first and disclosures at the end. Disclosures primarily because if many organizations or many people like Vinny may perhaps start with what to disclose, and that's many organizations have approached me that can you do a report for us. So that's not actually a starting point. However, given that there is so much lack of understanding, disclosure also could be a starting point. So I'm just negating what I just said. But compliance, because most companies in India would actually try to see whether manage its liabilities, right? And then see if they can move beyond compliance. And managing compliance is still a mindset across many companies in India, and more so for hard to abate sector. And the externalization of negative social and environmental impact happens within the bounds of laws. Businesses are legally bound on paper, but there could be a lot of non-compliances happening, especially more on labor and environmental aspects, which are completely not on the radar, on the business radar. And it's often considered to be okay, right? And this is how it happens, and this is how things are done, and this is how business is getting done. At the same time, the company who is on this journey could also explore various related eco opportunities and set up goals which may not be so smart and so on. So smart specifically is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Then the next level that you want to move on goals is pretty ambitious, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the risk portion is important because it needs to move into the risk management system, enterprise risk management system. Because if you don't have a process or a management system for tracking risks, then whatever Guy mentioned about risks will not translate into actions, or you may not be able to convert these risks into opportunities, right? And reporting is whatever work you do, and how do you pull it all together. And like I stated earlier, reporting also can drive the entire sustainability agenda. And that's how GRI has made headroads in India. Because when you just start doing, collating information, you understand what are all the gaps, and then you can work backwards and try to plug in what you don't have, more from what needs to be done. So it gives you that framework from which you can use to set up your entire system, right? A value-driven company is beyond an integrated strategy. So while many may feel that we have integrated and we're talking about ESG integration, but I would say that there are companies that actually exist with certain core values, and many of the B Corp companies are like that. So you don't even have to talk about integration to them, because it is the entire business model is for generating positive impacts on the environment and the society. It exists for benefiting of the society, and so on. And to the slide that Anand and Manish showed earlier was that what is the purpose of the company and why should it exist? So is the business, is the purpose of business is business, or is it for value creation and value generation? So value-driven companies are much ahead of those companies having an integrated strategy. So and this slide is pretty verbose, and it needs some absorption, and you can actually tailor. So Vinny can actually tailor this slide to understand. So I've just highlighted where most Indian companies would be. It could be also pre-compliance, it could be also beyond compliance, and it is not necessary that you have to take so beyond compliance, and in certain areas you can be an integrated strategy, right? So it's not necessary that you have to be on the same row, is what I'm trying to say. So this and also the language and the contextualization can vary a little bit from sector to sector. So depending on the sector that Vinny is in, the contextualization of this slide can happen. So there are a variety of maturity models, and maturity models intrigue me, actually. I'm a big fan of maturity model because it helps contextualize it and present it to the management. So Vinny can use a maturity tool. It could be McKinsey's maturity, sustainability maturity tool, or it could be some simplistic tool. It could be UN Global Compact's maturity tool. So there are many levels of maturity assessment that can be done. So the McKinsey one is even more complicated. It goes down into strategy, then the strategy, integration of the strategy, stakeholder engagement, and it's fairly more complicated compared to this simplistic. And the Global Compact is much more simplistic. It's just one slider with where you are with respect to, but it doesn't compartmentalize it into compliance, externalization, and so on. So I spend a lot of time on this slide explaining this slide. So next, material issues, how traditionally we are used to looking at it is an issue important from a stakeholder perspective, especially if the stakeholder, there's an environmental or social impact. So that's where the match happens. That is it a business issue, and is it the right quadrant would be the one that you would actually look at. Now, a newer concept is coming in, which is focus in and focus out, right? So focus in and focus out actually changes the way the reporting has to happen for investors, and the reporting has to happen for various other stakeholders. So that is the concept of double materiality. And double materiality dives into financial materiality, and therefore the impact on environmental and social materiality. So what you have on the right is the impact on society and environment. So for example, a company is into conflict minerals. So conflict minerals is not necessarily a business, doesn't have too much of a business impact, but it has a social and environmental impact, right? So that needs to be reported for multiple stakeholders. Similarly, the ellipse that you see on the right is the one which has high value impacts financially on the company, and therefore it's a financial hit on the company. And therefore for investors, lenders, and other creditors, this needs to be reported. So there is not just the right quadrant, but you are looking at the entire, chain of issues on the top right and the bottom right that needs to be reported for various stakeholders. More complicated, more number issues. So it has both the amalgamation. So you would not just do the right quadrant, but you would do the entire thing out here. So quite a lot of issues to report. So more work for Vinny. Next. So taking the material issues, and of course, materiality is determined through stakeholder engagement. And what we would like to see is that after the materiality assessment, it goes into strategy and roadmap development. The roadmap development, the roadmap needs to be implemented. So materiality usually happens through engagement, identifying the risk and opportunities across the entire value chain. And we would look at prioritizing the actions, key metrics on all the various economic, environmental, social dimensions, set goals, and these need to be. So Guy spoke about governance, but it has to be in form of responsibility, accountability, consulted in form, or a responsibility, accountability metrics with money and a a ring-fenced budget is what I would say. Without money, things will not move into the implementation phase, and that's very, very important. The implementation will need a lot of processes, SOPs, policies, and a plan. And that's how you would go into the implementation. Without a plan, one would just keep talking, and most corporates actually don't have sustainability plans or time bound plans, because sustainability is not the main product of the company, and therefore these plans are actually very, very stretchy kind of plans. They really don't have strict timelines. And then you have to do the organizational performance assessment, and this is a tedious task. So Vinny needs would need IT systems or systems and processes to help manage the data and monitor the data and report it back to the various stakeholders. So it's a very tedious process. There are a lot of audits that happen. You need to get everything assured and so on and so forth. So it's pretty, a deep sort of a chain, circle, I would say. And that's how you would go about integrating material issues across the entire, and board here doesn't mean the board. Okay, so it's across the, so the pillars, of course, just reiterating, it's operation, strategy, and culture. What people don't understand when it comes to, so many organizations, many senior leaders think of integration only in form of operations. They are not even looking at the strategy or at the culture. Many astute leaders and astute CEOs know that the strategic integration has to be first, right? So that's where comes into the place, how you want to be seen and so on. And culture is often forgotten, and therefore HR is your partner. If HR is not your partner, then Vinny will not get any support to do whatever she has set out to do. And most organizations do not have HR as their partner. So we haven't enrolled the HR as our partner for sustainability integration. Next. Okay, so that's what, doing things right, setting the tone, getting the commitment. The leadership commitment is most important. That's the strategic integration. Most people think integration is operational integration, but that's not the case. They don't understand strategic integration and cultural integration. And cultural integration, believe me, is the trickiest one. It is most difficult. It has, and that alignment takes a long time. So, and it takes, variety of, it's not just science over there, it's also change management, looking at creative ways of engagement, especially associates. So that's how integration happens. Next. Communication, that's key. But then when you do the functional integration, we would want to understand, okay, who are the key functions that need to drive the progress, and what are the functions that can influence that. For example, my CFO is my partner, because many times I actually go to him and say that I need to do this, I need this much fund. And sometimes it could be a pilot project. Sometimes it could be something that is, just in your head. And so Vinny needs to make friends with some functions where they can have some influence on the CEO, and the CEO then can influence the board. So need to have that kind of, friendship, I would say. So for me, my CFO is a function of particular influence, right? Which can help me drive sustainability in various areas, including CSR and risk and various other things, right? And then we look at key functions to be integrated, and then core strategy and importance to the sustainability goal we identify. So we look at various ways of doing it. So influence in the core strategy and importance to a current sustainability goal, that's how we would look at it. And the highest priority would be to engage for the strategy, operation, and culture, which I spoke about. That would be the highest priority. Second is for, the invite and educate through employee engagement. That happens, but over a period of time, it needs to go into that highest priority area. Next slide. So I think I've come to an end. Yeah.
Thank you.
So over to you. Over to you. Sorry, I've extended, I think.
No, not at all. Thank you, Dr. Sunita.
Yeah.
I think you explained the concepts around maturity model, around materiality, and then functional mapping very lucidly. If I can try to summarize the learnings for Vinny in 3 key points, it is 1, understanding and focusing on the critical areas with well-defined boundaries, because it will help channelize the management bandwidth in areas where it's needed the most. So, more so because when the concept of double materiality now intersects both ESG and financial parameters. Second is around the integration and how ESG cannot work in silos, but across functions, and that mapping needs to be done. And not only the strategic and operational dimension, but also talking about the cultural aspects, because finally it's what also Guy mentioned towards the start as an investor, that it's at the end of the day, people are the key to do effective ESG integration. And last but not the least, set up a journey starting with goal settings, roadmaps, and robust scenario planning, because that will help us tackle any crisis management issues at a later stage. Of course, it's a learning and continuous improvement process. Well, finally, if we see, next slide, please, Anand. It's all about the moving parts and the jigsaw puzzles fitting in it with each other smoothly, and ESG integration cannot work in isolation or silos. And I think with this, now we can move towards addressing the elephant in the room, the questions that many of you have posted for our speakers. And I think I can start with the first question that I could see by Akashdeep Dhar Chaudhary. I'll just say that there are so many ESG frameworks, be it SASB, GRI, BRSR, UNFDG. So does that make benchmarking difficult? And are all the 3 parameters, which is E, S, and G, equally important industry-wide? Or should there be more specific industry-specific frameworks? So Guy, why don't you take a shot at it, and then Dr. Sunita, you can probably add on to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is that there are lots of frameworks for reporting and what good reporting indicators look like, but perhaps fewer frameworks, for instance, on what good ESG risk management looks like, where international good practice is linked to IFC performance standards. So I think people need to be clear in their mind sort of what is expected when it comes to reporting publicly, but then what does acceptable harmonized process with respect to risk management look like. The UN SDGs has been a really interesting addition, and that there's been a real rise in impact investing in the last 3, 4, 5 years, and sort of how you approach impact investing in an investment process, and then in terms of articulating that to what it looks like within a corporate value chain, has led to a bit of a proliferation on impact as well. But ultimately, it's about defining what key contribution you can make at the company, and then measuring that from a baseline, that the principle, and then the indicators just sort of come out of that, and you can choose different frameworks. But I wouldn't be overwhelmed, is my sort of probably key message back to you. I would start with sort of this basics of, as Sunita also said, if you can if you know you can be confident about compliance, that's the starting point. And then after that, risk management in line with good international practice from an ESG, performance standards or equivalent. And then in terms of reporting, there are different frameworks you could use, and then you have a certain element of choice. It is complicated though.
Dr. Sunita, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it can be overwhelming. It is complicated. But, when you study a sector, to simplify it, I have always found value chain mapping as the best thing that any sustainability person can start, doing. So whether you are a consultant or whether you are in a corporate or whether you are in a small company, try and understand where all there is impact inward and impact outward. So you start with the value chain, your value chain, what are you influencing? So ultimately, sustainability is all about looking beyond the fence of the company, right? So which the business doesn't understand, but business also doesn't understand that these issues could have financial impact. So the first thing that any sustainability professional needs to do before even going to doing the benchmarking and all of that, benchmarking, I'll give a few tips on how to do benchmarking. So instead of being overwhelmed and reading all the requirements of reporting framework or even investor rankings and all of that, and many of them are aligned, believe me, they are aligned. So because CDP has to align with GRI, TCFD has to align with GRI has to align with everything, because if GRI wants to stay relevant, that alignment needs to happen. So instead of going and looking at all these frameworks in separately, start looking at your value chain. The moment you start looking at your value chain, you will know that, okay, I do have a labor issue here. I know that there is an environmental impact here. I know that the suppliers' payments are being withheld. I know that this compliance is not happening. So you will get a general sense of what is going wrong in your organization. You will also have a general sense of what is going right in the organization. That's when you'll start looking at your risks and opportunities, and you want to accentuate and you would want to turn the risk into opportunities. So value chain is the starting point, and that's what you start benchmarking in the first place, right? And so the simple tip on benchmarking is to go to the website of various competitors and look at their sustainability reports. Look at all the indicators, but start with the value chain, and if the value chain mapping has been done or not. So that is what you would start with. Even SDG, UN SDG or GRI talks about the value chain mapping, and that's the first starting point. Indicator by indicator mapping is fine, who reports what, but you will see a pattern emerge that a particular sector, a set of indicators are being reported, right? So when you see that pattern, you will know that this is not relevant here, and therefore you will not report on it, right? So actually start with the value chain. Believe me, it will make your life easier. And my opinion about CSR is it needs a lot of work.
Thank you, Dr. Sunita. Value chain, that's the keyword.
That's keyword, yeah.
And that's very practical, as a suggestion. In fact, just to add to it, Akashdeep, on your question, SASB inherently as a framework is aligned across sectors, and that partly probably answers, it gives the inherent weightages to different ESG parameters dependent on the industry classification. They, I think, currently have 77 such subsector classifications. Well, moving to the next question, Abhay Bhavsar. Abhay had made an observation also, and where he did mention that disclosures from a corporate angle are very closely embedded within the compliance function. Thanks, Abhay. And he has a question whether there should be a separate budget for ESG, since it's a cost-centric activity. And before I ask Anand to take this up, and then our speakers, what is, Anand, your view on it being a cost-centric activity? Because I can see some smiling faces, and I think that itself is a questionable, debatable point. But yeah, I'll let Anand start.
Yeah, I think once ESG team or ESG group is viewed as a cost center or a separate COE or something that is separate from the mainstream, I think it starts losing its relevance. So ESG needs to be integrated through corporate strategy, and which is where Guy's point of management buy-in or leadership buy-in is completely essential there, because rather than being a cost center, a few ESG initiatives, if they are done well, I think they can really add value to company in terms of lowering risk and lowering costs, improving the stock price, improving a lot of other metrics that will eventually lead to better financial performance. So that's my view on this.
Thank you. I think, shall we move to the next question? It is from RGC. Sorry, the full is not there, but the question is that does ESG calculation demands initiatives for each material risk? And if yes, then CSR initiatives are also considered into that risk. Guy, would you like to take this? I can just answer the second part, that yes, CSR initiatives are done as part of ESG, and it broadly falls within the theme of community relations that a company does, but it's just one part of the broader social pillar of ESG. But does ESG calculation demands initiatives for each material risk? How do you as an investor and a corporate look at it, Guy and Dr. Sunita?
I mean, I would say that the way you need to think about risk is that what do you need to do to avoid, reduce, mitigate, or tolerate that risk, essentially. And so a lot of it is not just about once you've mapped out where your key risks are, sort of following some of the logic that Sunita gave you earlier, you then need to have an appropriate process to drive down that risk to an acceptable level, at which point your management can tolerate that risk. And so there'll be different processes for different risks. So how you look at health and safety on a construction site and sort of do a sort of risk hazard analysis and then reduce risks there will be very different from how you might look at sensitive receptors to effluent from a factory gate kind of thing. Very different, but ultimately you need to have a process to reduce and mitigate that to an acceptable standard. And to where you started, Manish, I absolutely agree. CSR can be part of that calculation, but only if your risk is social, to do with, let's say, community development and making sure that community buy into a project. What CSR can't do is, so long it needs to be aimed at those affected by the company value chain. It can't just be sort of a side project. It has to be aimed at affected parties, and then it really is an ESG calculation as well.
Thank you.
Agree, Sunita?
Yeah, Dr. Sunita.
Yeah, so basically, after you've done the value chain piece and you identify material risk, you will definitely need to do something about it. So I echo what Guy said. And if I can take the earlier question of Abhay also, there should, and sustainability is not a cost-centric activity. All sustainability professionals need to believe deeply in that. And my experience has been many of the proposals or the recommendations that we do reduce the cost for the company, either operational cost or cost to customers, right, over a lifetime. We have to be able to show that. And that's where most of the sustainability professionals have to become very astute. Your calculations have to be there. And yes, there should not be any separate budget except for whatever you want to showcase, right? Otherwise, the integration will not happen. Suppose you want to do something which is, you want to do a one-off life cycle assessment, or you want to do a pilot, right? So there are budgets to be taken for these initiatives because you want to do something with technology or do something with which is some science behind it. You will need that money. But no, definitely never take the budget for the entire organization for implementation of initiatives. That means there'll be no ownership with the various stakeholders. So let the entire budget lie elsewhere. Be free of money is what I would advise sustainability professionals. It's the best way you live light.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sunita and Guy. We'll move to the next question from Vetrivel. And it's a very oft-repeated question, but very important. And thanks, Petri, for bringing this up. So why do the ESG scores differ significantly across rating providers, be it S&P or any other analyst companies? And there is the classic case doing, I remember, since a couple of years around Tesla and GM, where multiple rating agencies gave them widely divergent scores. So, Guy, I would like you to take this up as an investor? Because when you evaluate, how do you really rely on on scores for the same company but being widely divergent?
I mean, that's not a question I can answer very easily, to be honest, Manish. I mean, partially because most of the businesses that CDC invest in are non-listed businesses, and so we wouldn't be relying on scores from S&P or anyone else. I mean, my guess is that the reason that scores will differ is because different ratings agencies will weight different parts of disclosures in different ways according to their to the value they place on different parts of the ESG landscape. But I don't want to answer for S&P, and I will refrain from giving a definite answer to that.
Sure. I'll just continue there, Vedri. So essentially what Guy mentioned, the weights are different, and that's why just relying on a reporting analyst's rating is often not the end all. And I think a due diligence or some kind of analysis that investors' own weightages or on any sector needs to be, I think, incorporated as part of it. One question for you, Dr. Sunita, is by Divyanshu Rai. What are the ways to map and assess sustainability risks and opportunities of any company?
One of the simplest frameworks that I have used, I mean, I was actually working on a SDG framework deployment. It's very simple. So it's simple to look at the goals, targets, and look at, okay, am I influencing this badly, and here are the positive impacts. So that is the easiest framework. The SDG framework is the easiest framework to map your risk and opportunities. Okay. You can also look at your material issues and look at the risk and opportunities. If you have a laundry list of material issues, you actually need to pass it through the materiality lens and then look at, okay, so for example, supply chain sustainability is a material issue. So what are the risks? What are the opportunities? Okay. So you can also sit with your risk and list of material issues and then map out what are the risks and opportunities and look at it from a business. So you can use SDG framework. You can use your list of material issues to map out the risk and opportunities. Okay. So there are templates available. You can go to SDG GRI handbook. I don't know what it's called. I don't recollect. But it'll give you an entire direction on how to do that. Or even if you go to GRI materiality, you will be able to identify how to do it.
Thanks. Well, there are a couple of questions and not surprising on BRSR. There is one question by Sandeep Mukherjee. It says that with the new BRSR framework being made mandatory from next year, will there be need for a separate standalone sustainability reporting? And a related question by Avinash is that how likely companies are ready to do ESG reporting in the new BRSR format as mandated by SEBI?
Should I take this?
Please.
Yeah. So this BRSR format puts company in the compliance mode, and that's worrying because actually there was also a SEBI circular saying that companies should go for integrated reporting. There was also something written by SEBI that you need not follow a format. You can cross-link it in your integrated report. So these are all the fine print that people seem to be missing. The legal team seems to be missing. So most companies end up putting out a BRSR report. And that's not what BRSR meant it to be. SEBI didn't mean it to be, because SEBI actually said that you can actually go in for an integrated report. You can continue with your normal reporting and link it to the BRSR format and tell us where the information is. Okay. However, many companies' legal teams don't understand this well, and to be on the safer side, wish to follow a template and therefore put out a separate BRSR report. And it is quite a lot of effort to argue with the legal, because we are not from legal, right?
So I have one question continuing from here. So For companies that are preparing an existing sustainability report, it makes sense because they already probably have a GRI aligned report or an integrated report, and which is probably more exhaustive, let's say, than a BRSR format. And it's then a formality to translate that into a new format or a template. But what about companies? And I just asked this, about the large section of companies which are not currently preparing any report, and it is their first time that they will go for disclosing a sustainability report. Should they go for a plain BRSR, or should they still look for a more robust GRI aligned report or an integrated report?
Manish, should I take this?
Yes, please.
Yeah, no, you should actually start with BRSR and do what is required. Move on to GRI in the next year. Okay, move on to look at the GRI framework, look at BRSR, and see if you can move to integrated reporting framework. That is when people will start taking you seriously. So Vinny will be taken up more seriously if it is in the integrated report, right? Rather than, however, there are challenges. Even if you look at the double materiality, you know that there are certain things that the investor is not interested in. Okay, so I'll be still putting out certain things over there. So should it be elsewhere? So that argument is a continuous struggle actually. So, but BRSR is a starting point, right? And if you do it completely with the intention that it's been put out, it's a good starting point.
I mean, if I might add as well, I mean, initiatives like BSRS are great to sort of start mainstreaming some indicators that allow you to compare company to company. But as an investor, it is a beginning. It is the compliance piece to begin with. And if you can sort of do more sort of to either in terms of your reporting or sort of what you do internally to demonstrate other indicators of sustainability, GRI or otherwise, that is moving yourself in a direction that is more forward-looking. And so I would very much see it as the minimum.
Yeah. Shall I move? Sonia has a interesting observation saying that often Indian suppliers are reacting to pressure from German companies. So it's gratifying to see so many Indian names on the window, indicating that there is a change happening here. I think we are almost around the. If there are any last questions, probably you can type it on the chat window. Or okay, there is one last question by Divyanshu. Let me just quickly take this. How far is India to establish a science-based dictionary defining what sustainability is and setting disclosure requirements for various financial sectors and corps about the extent to which they abide by this dictionary? What are your opinions on EU taxonomy? Does it require more improvements in respect to stringency?
Manish, my recommendation here is that let's get on to this question offline. It's a pretty loaded question.
Yes.
And we will circle back to Divyanshu after this webinar in a couple of days.
Sure. So I think we should, with all your permission from all of you, will bring the webinar to an end. It's a great first session. Thank you all for joining today and making it engaging through all the questions and answer session that we had. Also hope that all of you have some interesting insights to take back with you. We sincerely thank Guy and Dr. Sunita for guiding Vinny and in the process all of us on this very important step of laying the right foundation for a strong ESG integration. And we will come back in a few weeks with the second edition to check on how Vinny's progress has been on our ESG efforts. And it will focus on helping us setting the KPIs and then towards the next steps of downstream ESG implementation. Thank you all of you.